Hey guys, tonight we enter the wonderful world of medieval knighthood, a place where men in expensive metal outfits swore sacred oaths about honor and loyalty before immediately solving most problems by hitting each other with sharpened steel. So before we ride directly into tonight's collection of strange knightly laws, ceremonial humiliation rituals, and deeply unnecessary acts of medieval masculinity, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy these calm little journeys through humanity's long history of terrible ideas. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You can barely see anything through the narrow slit of your helmet. Your armor weighs roughly the same as a disappointed donkey. Sweat runs down your back. Mud clings to your boots like it personally hates you. Somewhere nearby, a horse is screaming loud enough to suggest it has just realized what medieval warfare actually involves. And through all the smoke, dust, flying arrows, and collective human regret, one thing matters above everything else. Your lord's banner, a brightly colored piece of fabric attached to a long pole. Yes, your entire survival strategy depends on aggressively following a flag. Welcome to the Middle Ages. As a medieval knight, you are forbidden to abandon your banner during battle. That banner is your unit marker, your commander's location, your source of orders, and occasionally the only proof that your side has not completely collapsed into armored chaos. Because medieval battles were disasters. Not cinematic disasters, actual disasters. Movies love showing clean formations and dramatic speeches. Real medieval combat involved thousands of exhausted men slipping in mud while trying to identify each other through tiny eye holes. Horses crashed into people. Spears snapped constantly. Someone was always yelling contradictory orders. And after about 10 minutes, everyone smelled terrible. Without the banner, you could easily become separated from your lord, which was dangerous, because knights fought as part of personal feudal retinues. Loyalty to your lord was everything. If his banner moved forward, you moved forward. If he stopped, you stopped. If he charged directly into a horrifying wall of enemy infantry, you politely followed him into the exact same terrible decision. Honor demanded it, and medieval honor had the emotional flexibility of a brick. If you abandoned the banner without orders, people assumed cowardice immediately. It did not matter if you were wounded, lost, blinded by dirt, or accidentally knocked into a ditch by a panicking horse named something heroic like Thunderfang. Medieval society would simply conclude that you lacked courage, which was catastrophic. Your lands could be seized, your reputation destroyed. Other nobles might refuse alliances with your family. Some armies punished desertion with execution. Others preferred public humiliation first, because medieval Europe never missed an opportunity to turn punishment into live entertainment. A disgraced knight could have his sword broken in front of a crowd, his spurs chopped off. Priests might even recite funeral prayers over him, as if his honor had died before his body had the decency to follow. And the truly unfortunate part? Enemy archers loved targeting banners. Of course they did. The giant colourful flag basically announced, "Important noble standing here? Please send arrows immediately." So while your banner symbolized courage, loyalty, and noble duty, it also functioned as medieval Europe's earliest version of a tactical mistake. You are sitting inside a crowded stone hall lit by hundreds of candles and at least 3 active fire hazards. The feast has already lasted several hours. Long wooden tables groan beneath roasted boar, thick bread, fish pies, cheese, ale, wine, and mysterious medieval sauces that probably contain ingredients best left unidentified for the survival of modern science. A lute player struggles bravely in the corner, while drunk nobles scream over him about land disputes, and whose grandfather killed whose uncle during a border conflict 30 years ago. So naturally tensions are high, and under absolutely no circumstances are you allowed to stab anyone. This was one of the most important rules of medieval knightly etiquette. Feasts were considered sacred spaces of hospitality and temporary peace. When a lord invited guests into his hall, everyone present was expected to behave with restraint and respect, at least publicly. Privately, medieval nobles were some of the pettiest human beings to ever wear fur-lined clothing. Insults happened constantly. Knights mocked each other's bravery, family history, appearance, political loyalties, and tournament performances. Entire blood feuds could begin because someone made a sarcastic comment about another man's horse. and yet drawing a weapon during a feast was considered deeply dishonourable. The reason was practical. Medieval politics depended heavily on negotiations during dinners and celebrations. Alliances were formed over wine, marriages arranged beside fireplaces, military campaigns planned while someone aggressively chewed goose meat nearby. If knights started killing each other every time an argument happened, most royal courts would have collapsed before dessert. Not that this stopped people from trying. Some medieval feasts became legendary disasters. Nobles occasionally ignored hospitality laws entirely and murdered rivals during banquets anyway. One famous example was the Black Dinner in Scotland, where young noble guests were invited to dine peacefully before suddenly being dragged outside and executed, which admittedly sends a mixed message regarding dinner etiquette. As a knight, you were expected to remain calm no matter how insulting the conversation became. You controlled your temper. You stayed seated. You maintained dignity. This was difficult because medieval feasts involved astonishing amounts of alcohol. Wine flowed constantly. Ale was safer than water in many places. By midnight, half the hall was shouting songs. Another quarter was unconscious under benches, and one ambitious noble was probably trying to arm wrestle a bishop. Still, if you attacked another knight at the table, punishment could be severe. Imprisonment, disgrace, fines, or even execution depending on the victim's status. Because medieval Europe could forgive murder surprisingly often. But ruining dinner? That was unacceptable. You're riding along a narrow forest road somewhere in medieval France, wearing heavy armor under the summer sun, and reconsidering every decision that led you here. Ahead of you walks a long line of Christian pilgrims. Elderly men lean on staffs. Women carry bags filled with bread and blankets. A few monks quietly pray as they travel toward a distant holy site hundreds of miles away. And according to the rules of knighthood, protecting these travelers is now partially your responsibility. No pressure. During the Middle Ages, Christian pilgrimages were incredibly common. Thousands of people crossed Europe every year, traveling to places like Jerusalem, Rome, or Santiago de Compostela. Some sought forgiveness for sins, others fulfilled religious vows. A few were probably just trying to survive a midlife crisis in the most medieval way possible. The roads, unfortunately, were dangerous. Bandits targeted pilgrims constantly because they carried money, supplies, and usually lacked protection. Mercenaries, deserters, starving peasants, and opportunistic criminals haunted forests and mountain passes across Europe, which meant the church expected knights to act as defenders of the faithful. Officially, a knight was supposed to protect the weak, defend Christianity, and uphold justice. This was one of the central ideals behind medieval chivalry. Reality was slightly messier. Some knights genuinely escorted pilgrims and defended travelers bravely. Others saw unarmed religious tourists as convenient walking wallets. Medieval morality could shift very quickly, depending on how expensive someone's horse looked. Still, publicly refusing to help pilgrims was dangerous for your reputation. The church held enormous power during the Middle Ages. Priests could shame nobles publicly. Bishops could pressure kings, and being labelled dishonourable or sinful could damage your standing throughout the region. No medieval knight wanted rumours spreading that he abandoned defenceless Christians on the road, especially because medieval gossip travelled faster than actual information somehow. Many knightly orders even formed specifically to protect pilgrims. The most famous were the Knights Templar, warrior monks who guarded Christian travellers in the Holy Land, which sounds noble and heroic until you remember they eventually became so rich and powerful that kings started panicking whenever they entered a room. Classic medieval problem. As you ride beside the pilgrims, your armour creaks with every movement. The road smells of dust, sweat, and horses. Somewhere in the trees, movement catches your attention briefly before disappearing again. Maybe it is nothing, or maybe it is 20 bandits preparing to attack. Either way, the pilgrims behind you expect protection. And medieval knighthood has just handed you another wonderful responsibility. Dying for strangers you met approximately 40 minutes ago. You sit atop a massive warhorse while an entire crowd watches you try not to embarrass yourself publicly. Trumpets echo across the tournament grounds. Colourful banners flap in the wind. Nobles fill the wooden stands eating roasted meat while pretending this event is a refined display of honour rather than an extremely expensive group concussion. Across the field stands another knight holding a lance the size of a small tree. And according to medieval tournament rules, both of you are expected to behave like civilized gentlemen while attempting to launch each other off horses at terrifying speeds. Naturally, tournaments were one of the most important parts of knightly culture. They allowed warriors to train for combat, win fame, attract wealthy patrons, and occasionally impress noblewomen by surviving repeated blunt force trauma. But strict rules governed these events, at least in theory. A knight was forbidden from using sharpened weapons during many tournaments. Certain strikes were banned entirely. Attacking an unhorsed opponent could bring punishment or disgrace. Some tournaments even prohibited hitting below the waist, which medieval men apparently considered unfair despite everything else happening. Breaking these rules could ruin your reputation instantly, because tournaments were not just entertainment. They were public performances of discipline and honor. Nobles, kings, merchants, and foreign ambassadors all watched carefully. If you acted recklessly or dishonorably, word spread quickly across noble courts. And medieval noble courts absolutely loved gossip. Especially expensive gossip involving armor. Many knights ignored the rules anyway. Tournament violence became so extreme during certain periods that kings occasionally banned events altogether. Participants died regularly from crushed skulls, broken necks, trampling horses, or weapons that accidentally became sharper than regulations allowed. It turns out placing aggressive armored nobles into competitive environments while thousands cheer for violence can create organizational challenges. One popular tournament event was the joust, where two mounted knights charged directly at each other with lances. The goal was to shatter the lance against your opponent's shield, or knock him off the horse. Which sounds honourable, until you realise medieval lances could explode into giant wooden splinters, travelling directly toward your face. Helmets helped slightly, sometimes, and tournaments outside the joust could become complete chaos. Large mock battles called melees involved groups of knights fighting across open fields for hours. Men were captured for ransom, beaten unconscious, or dragged through mud while wealthy spectators applauded politely nearby. A wonderful family activity. Still, tournaments offered enormous rewards. Victorious knights gained money, fame, political influence, and admiration. Losing honourably was acceptable. Losing dishonourably was not. Because in medieval Europe, getting flattened by a horse was survivable. Looking foolish in front of rich people was forever. You are standing in the middle of a cold castle courtyard, while 24 nobles stare at you expectantly. This is unfortunate. A knight from another household has just accused you of lying during a land dispute. Harsh words were exchanged. Someone insulted someone's honour. Someone else mentioned cowardice. And now the situation has reached medieval Europe's favourite solution to literally everything: violence with witnesses. As a knight, refusing a duel could permanently destroy your reputation. Honour was the foundation of noble society. Your reputation determined alliances, marriages, friendships, military command, and political influence. If other nobles believed you lacked courage, your social standing collapsed immediately, which meant you were expected to defend your name no matter how dangerous the challenge became, even if the duel was obviously stupid. Especially if it was obviously stupid. The medieval mind viewed personal bravery as proof of moral worth. Courage showed discipline, loyalty, and noble character. Fear suggested weakness, and weakness, in feudal society, spread through gossip faster than plague rats through a grain warehouse. If you refused combat publicly, other knights might mock you for years. Lords could stop trusting you in battle. Noble families might reject marriage alliances with your relatives. Nothing says romantic medieval future quite like, "Sorry, my father says your family contains cowards." Dueling rules varied across Europe. Some disputes were settled with swords, others with lances or maces. Judicial duels were especially terrifying because people genuinely believed God would grant victory to the righteous side, which must have been awkward whenever the clearly terrible person won. Before the duel, priests sometimes supervised ceremonies. Oaths were sworn, weapons inspected. Crowds gathered eagerly because medieval society treated public combat the same way modern people treat streaming services. Entertainment had fewer subscription fees back then. Of course, duels were incredibly dangerous. Even experienced knights could die from infected wounds, shattered bones, or blows to the head. Armor reduced risk, but it did not turn you immortal. Medieval medicine still believed applying questionable substances to open wounds was acceptable science. Many duels ended with one fighter yielding before death, but surrender itself carried humiliation. A defeated knight might owe ransom money, public apologies, land concessions, or political favors, and the audience remembered everything. That was perhaps the worst part of medieval noble life. Nothing stayed private. Every embarrassment became a story repeated endlessly inside castle halls over wine and roasted meat. Years later, people might still whisper about the day you lost a duel in front of half the kingdom. Because medieval Europe could forgive violence surprisingly easily. But embarrassment? Never. You are standing beside a muddy battlefield road, while an exhausted rider approaches carrying another lord's colours. His horse is barely functioning. Foam hangs from its mouth. The messenger himself looks like he has not slept in 3 days, which is understandable because medieval roads were essentially long stretches of danger connected by occasional disappointment. As he rides closer, your hand tightens around your sword instinctively. But you cannot attack him. At least, you are not supposed to. One of the strangest yet most important rules of medieval warfare was the protection of messengers. These riders carried military orders, peace proposals, ransom negotiations, royal decrees, and battlefield information between castles and armies. Without them, entire kingdoms collapsed into confusion, which happened often enough already. A messenger might travel through forests filled with bandits, cross enemy territory, or ride between hostile armies carrying delicate negotiations that determined whether thousands of people lived or died. So knights were expected to grant them safe passage. Officially, harming a messenger was considered dishonorable and dangerous. If rulers started killing every envoy who arrived with bad news, diplomacy became difficult very quickly. Wars would drag on endlessly because nobody could safely negotiate surrender terms, prisoner exchanges, or ceasefires, and medieval wars already lasted long enough to make everyone involved miserable. Kings understood this rule well. Even bitter enemies usually tolerated diplomats and heralds because one day they might need their own messages delivered safely too. It was essentially medieval Europe reluctantly inventing professional courtesy. Of course, reality remained complicated. Some messengers were arrested, others disappeared mysteriously. A few ended up floating in rivers after delivering particularly unwelcome information. Medieval rulers occasionally reacted to bad news with the emotional maturity of overturned furniture. Still, openly attacking an envoy damaged reputations badly. A knight who killed a messenger could be labelled dishonourable across noble courts. Lords might stop trusting him. Alliances could weaken. Religious authorities sometimes condemned attacks on diplomatic envoys as sinful violations of sacred custom. And reputation mattered constantly. That is the exhausting part of medieval knighthood. You are not simply fighting enemies. You are performing honour every hour of your life in front of a judgmental audience wearing fur cloaks. Even during war, ceremony mattered. Messengers often announced themselves formally before entering castles. Heraldic symbols identified their loyalties. Some carried written seals, proving authenticity, because apparently medieval Europe already understood the dangers of suspicious documents arriving from strangers. As the rider finally stops before you, exhausted and covered in road dust, he reaches into his satchel carefully. Everyone nearby watches nervously, because the letter he carries might announce peace, or surrender, or another battle, which means this tired man on a dying horse may currently be the most powerful person in the kingdom. The castle chapel smells of candle wax, wet stone, and exhausted fear. Outside, blacksmiths hammer armor late into the night, while horses stomp nervously in the courtyard below. Men sharpen swords by torchlight. Priests move quietly between rows of kneeling knights, whose confidence has started fading at roughly the same speed as their chances of survival tomorrow. And now, according to the rules of medieval knighthood, you are expected to pray. Not casually, seriously. Before major battles, knights were often required to confess sins, attend mass, and prepare spiritually for combat. Some spent entire nights in vigil beside their weapons, kneeling silently in churches while candles flickered across polished steel, which sounds noble and dramatic until you imagine trying to stay spiritually focused, while your knees slowly disintegrate on cold stone floors. The medieval world viewed warfare through religion constantly. Battles were not simply political struggles or territorial disputes. Many people believed God actively judged the outcome of wars. Victory meant divine favour. Defeat meant someone, somewhere, had probably offended heaven recently. This placed enormous pressure on knights to appear morally worthy before combat. Confession became especially important because nobody wanted to die in battle carrying unresolved sins into the afterlife. And medieval Christianity had a very long list of sins: violence, greed, lust, drunkenness, pride, blasphemy. Unfortunately, medieval knighthood also encouraged most of those professionally. So before battle, long lines of armoured nobles waited to confess things to exhausted priests who were likely hearing the exact same crimes repeatedly. Some knights fasted before battle. Others donated money to churches hoping to improve divine support for the upcoming massacre. Relics of saints were carried into combat like holy good luck charms. Entire armies marched beneath religious banners believing heaven itself supported them. This confidence occasionally lasted right up until arrows arrived. The church heavily promoted the image of knights as holy defenders of Christianity. During the Crusades especially, warriors were promised spiritual rewards for fighting enemies of the faith, a remarkably effective recruiting strategy. Still, beneath all the ceremony, most knights understood the reality of battle. Prayer was not only religious devotion, it was preparation for death. Tomorrow you might lose friends, you might lose limbs, you might disappear beneath charging horses in a muddy field, while some distant noble later describes the event as a glorious victory. History tends to simplify things for convenience. As candles flicker around the chapel, you lower your head again while armoured men whisper prayers beside you in the darkness. Outside, the storm winds grow louder, and somewhere beyond the hills, another army is praying for the exact opposite outcome. Your stomach feels like it is attempting to escape your body. Across the muddy field ahead stands an enemy army covered in steel, banners, and deeply personal hostility. Archers adjust arrows calmly. Horses snort clouds into the cold morning air. Somewhere nearby, a young squire is trying very hard not to vomit directly onto an important nobleman's boots. And according to medieval knightly rules, you must appear completely fearless. This was not optional. A knight could feel terror privately, of course. Medieval people were still human despite their alarming commitment to public suffering, but visibly showing fear before battle was considered deeply shameful, because fear spreads. If one knight panicked, others might lose confidence. If enough men broke formation, entire armies could collapse into chaos within minutes. Medieval battles often depended less on casualties and more on morale. Once soldiers believed defeat had begun, survival instincts took over immediately, and survival instincts tend to care very little about honor. So knights trained themselves to appear calm even during horrifying situations. You stood tall beside your horse. You adjusted your armor slowly and deliberately. You spoke confidently. You pretended the approaching wall of sharpened spears looked completely manageable. Inside your helmet, meanwhile, your brain was likely screaming, "We are absolutely going to die today." But outwardly, dignity mattered. Medieval noble culture revolved around reputation constantly. Courage was admired above nearly everything else. Songs celebrated brave knights for generations. Cowards became jokes repeated across castle halls for decades. No one wanted to become that knight who screamed and ran into a swamp during the battle of somewhere important. Unfortunately, battle itself gave you many opportunities to panic. War horses crashed into infantry lines with horrifying force. Arrows darkened the sky. Men disappeared beneath trampling feet. Armor protected you somewhat, but not enough to inspire comfort. A mace to the helmet could still turn your afternoon into a medical emergency very quickly, and medieval medicine was less healthcare system and more creative optimism with herbs. Still, knights were expected to master fear publicly. Some joked before battle, others prayed constantly. Veterans often appeared strangely calm, which came less from bravery and more from exhaustion after surviving enough campaigns to emotionally detach from reality altogether. A surprisingly modern coping mechanism. As trumpets sound across the field, the cavalry beside you lowers their lances in near-perfect formation. Sunlight glints across polished helmets. Banners snap violently in the wind. It looks magnificent from a distance, which is helpful, because from up close it mostly looks like several hundred terrified men trying extremely hard not to admit they are terrified. And somehow, according to medieval society, that counted as courage. You wake before sunrise inside a freezing castle chamber because your armor has started rusting again. This is your life now. As a medieval knight, your armor is not merely equipment. It is your status, your livelihood, your protection, and the single most expensive object you will probably ever own, besides perhaps a horse equally committed to ruining your finances. And according to knightly expectations, it must remain in perfect condition at all times. No dents if possible, no visible rust, no neglected straps, no loose fittings, because nothing destroyed noble credibility faster than looking unprepared. Armour in the Middle Ages was astonishingly expensive. A full suit of plate armour could cost the equivalent of several farms or years of income for ordinary people. Even chainmail alone required thousands upon thousands of interlocked metal rings painstakingly crafted by hand. Meanwhile, peasants nearby were struggling to afford bread. Feudalism had a certain imbalance to it. Maintaining armour became a daily obsession. Metal rusted constantly from rain, sweat, mud, and blood. Leather straps cracked. Buckles loosened. Padding underneath absorbed enough moisture to qualify as its own ecosystem. After campaigns, squires spent endless hours cleaning every piece carefully, while knights inspected the results with terrifying levels of disappointment. A neglected suit of armour reflected badly on your discipline and honour. Other nobles judged appearances constantly. Rust suggested laziness. Damaged equipment suggested incompetence. And incompetence in medieval warfare usually ended with someone writing a tragic song about your mistakes afterward. No pressure. Armour also had to fit properly. This was harder than it sounds, because medieval knights frequently gained weight during winters filled with feasts and alcohol, before suddenly needing to fit back into combat gear for spring campaigns. Imagine discovering your life or death protective shell no longer closes because you spent 3 months enthusiastically consuming roasted boar beside fireplaces. Many knights likely experienced this exact humiliation. Even dressing in armour required assistance. A full harness involved layers of clothing, padding, mail, straps, buckles, and steel plates carefully secured in the correct order. Without squires helping you, preparation took enormous amounts of time, and after all that effort, you still overheated immediately. Popular imagination often treats armour like an invincible metal shell, but real knights sweated constantly inside it. Summer campaigns were brutal. Long marches became torture. Helmets trapped heat beautifully, while also limiting vision and airflow. Essentially, medieval engineers succeeded in creating wearable ovens with swords. Still, your armour mattered enormously, because when battle finally arrived, and arrows began falling from the sky, every polished plate and tightened strap suddenly became the difference between surviving gloriously or becoming an expensive cautionary tale lying face down in the mud. The battle is still raging around you. Men scream in the distance. Horses crash through broken formations. Somewhere beyond the smoke, your lord's banner still waves above the chaos. Technically, according to every military rule of the Middle Ages, you are supposed to remain focused on fighting. Unfortunately, directly ahead of you sits an abandoned enemy wagon overflowing with silver cups. And suddenly, discipline becomes extremely difficult. One of the strictest rules in medieval warfare was that knights were forbidden from looting too early during battle. Soldiers were expected to maintain formation until victory had been officially secured. This rule existed because medieval armies had an astonishing tendency to completely lose self-control the moment treasure appeared. And honestly, from a financial perspective, it made sense. Knighthood was expensive. Armour cost fortunes, horses cost fortunes. Weapons cost fortunes. Existing as a medieval noble apparently required setting money on fire continuously while pretending this was normal. So warfare often doubled as business. Victorious knights expected rewards. Enemy camps contained gold, wine, jewellery, weapons, food, expensive fabrics, and prisoners worth ransom money. Capturing a wealthy noble alive could make you richer overnight, which meant temptation during battle was everywhere. The problem came when soldiers started looting before the enemy had fully collapsed. This happened constantly. Knights would spot abandoned supplies or fleeing wagons, and immediately break formation to grab valuables. Discipline vanished. Units scattered across battlefields, chasing treasure like heavily armed raccoons. Meanwhile, the enemy army, not actually defeated yet, suddenly regrouped and counterattacked. Several medieval battles turned into disasters this exact way. Nothing destroys military momentum faster than your cavalry abandoning combat to argue over silver plates, while enemy reinforcements arrive behind them. Commanders hated this behaviour. Some lords threatened harsh punishments for unauthorised looting. Others promised rewards only after battle ended. A few attempted strict systems dividing spoils fairly afterward, though medieval nobles were not historically famous for calm, resource-sharing discussions, especially while carrying swords. Looting itself could also become horrifyingly violent. Once armies collapsed completely, discipline disappeared almost everywhere. Soldiers stripped bodies, robbed civilians, burned villages, and fought each other over valuables. Sieges were especially brutal because victorious armies often viewed captured cities as giant reward boxes filled with property they believed they had earned. Human civilization has always struggled tremendously with the phrase, "act responsibly after victory." As the fighting continues around you, another knight suddenly gallops past carrying stolen tapestries, draped across his horse like some kind of armored interior decorator. Ahead, enemy soldiers begin regrouping again, which means the battle is not over yet, and thanks to your fellow knights getting distracted by shiny objects, there is now a very real chance everyone here is about to die stupidly. You kneel in a cold stone hall while your lord stands above you holding a sword across your shoulders. Torches flicker against the castle walls. Noble witnesses watch silently nearby. Somewhere in the background, a priest mutters prayers while trying not to think too hard about how many people in this room will eventually attempt to kill each other over inheritance disputes. You swear loyalty anyway, because as a medieval knight, obedience to your lord is not a suggestion. It is your entire existence. The feudal system depended on oaths. Kings granted land to powerful nobles. Nobles granted land to knights. In return, knights promised military service, loyalty, and support during war. Simple in theory, catastrophically complicated in practice. Once you swore fealty, your lord expected complete obedience. If he summoned you to war, you went. If he demanded taxes, you paid them. If he ordered you to defend a castle in the middle of nowhere during winter, while everyone slowly froze together in collective misery, congratulations. That was now your problem too. Refusing your lord openly could destroy everything. Disobedient knights risked losing lands, titles, wealth, and political protection. In extreme cases, rebellion was treated as treason punishable by imprisonment or execution. And medieval executions always carried an unsettling amount of ceremony. The difficulty came from the fact that medieval politics resembled an enormous collapsing spiderweb made entirely from marriage alliances and personal grudges. A knight might owe loyalty to multiple nobles at once. Perhaps your local lord served a duke, who served a king, who was currently fighting another king married to your cousin's sister, through an arrangement nobody fully understood anymore. Suddenly every war became a family argument involving siege towers. This created impossible situations constantly. If two lords you served declared war on each other, which oath mattered more? Medieval Europe never developed a satisfying answer to this question besides, hopefully not your problem. Spoiler, it became your problem frequently. Some knights changed sides during conflicts entirely, especially if better offers appeared elsewhere. Loyalty was sacred right up until land, survival, or political opportunity entered the conversation. Then morality became remarkably flexible. Still, publicly honor demanded obedience. A knight who abandoned his lord during battle became infamous instantly. Songs mocked traitors. Chroniclers recorded betrayals for generations. Noble families carried the shame for decades afterward. As always, medieval society treated reputation like oxygen, and your lord held enormous power over your daily life anyway. He controlled your lands, legal protections, income, and military obligations. If he disliked you enough, your future became very unpleasant very quickly. So you obeyed, even when the orders were reckless, even when the war made no sense, even when your lord was clearly an arrogant idiot riding confidently toward disaster, while insisting everything remained under control, which historically speaking happened quite often. You are standing inside a crowded medieval court surrounded by nobles dressed in velvet, fur, silk, and enough jewelry to bankrupt several villages simultaneously. Musicians play softly in the background, while servants carry trays of wine through the hall. Everyone smiles politely. Everyone bows correctly. Everyone speaks in careful, measured tones. And beneath this elegant surface, absolutely everyone is judging everyone else constantly. Welcome to court life. As a medieval knight, one of the most dangerous mistakes you could make was publicly insulting a noble woman. Not because medieval society suddenly became progressive overnight. Far from it. Noble women still lived under enormous restrictions and were expected to navigate a deeply male-dominated world carefully. But aristocratic women represented family honor, political alliances, inheritance claims, and social reputation. Insulting one woman often meant insulting an entire noble house, and medieval noble houses reacted to disrespect with alarming enthusiasm. A careless joke, rude comment, or public humiliation could trigger feuds, duels, political retaliation, or complete social exile from court circles. Knights were expected to show courtesy toward noble women at all times, especially in public settings. This expectation became central to the idea of chivalry. Officially, knights defended women, protected the weak, and behaved with refined dignity. In poetry and songs, noble women inspired heroic deeds and noble sacrifice. In reality, medieval courts were giant pressure cookers filled with gossip, jealousy, manipulation, affairs, and passive-aggressive compliments disguised as politeness. Essentially, imagine a modern celebrity scandal environment, except everyone involved owned swords. Courtly love traditions made everything even stranger. Knights often publicly devoted themselves to noble women through poems, gifts, tournament victories, and dramatic declarations of loyalty. Sometimes these women were already married, sometimes to extremely dangerous men. This caused problems occasionally. A knight who embarrassed or insulted a high-born lady risked immediate consequences. Her relatives could challenge him to duels. Lords might ban him from court entirely. Kings occasionally intervened in scandals if powerful families became involved. Because medieval politics somehow always transformed personal awkwardness into national instability, and public image mattered desperately. Courts operated almost entirely through appearances. A knight needed charm, manners, and diplomacy alongside military skill. Winning battles helped your reputation, certainly, but so did knowing when not to make an inappropriate joke after 4 cups of wine. Many knights failed this challenge magnificently. As you stand in the crowded hall, listening carefully to every word leaving your mouth, nearby nobles continue smiling politely through layers of hidden rivalry and suspicion. Someone laughs too loudly across the room. Someone else suddenly stops speaking when you approach. And somewhere nearby, one badly timed insult is probably about to start another war. The enemy line is moving toward you slowly through the morning fog. Spears glimmer ahead like a steel forest. War drums echo across the valley. Beside you, horses shift nervously, while armored knights pretend not to notice the very obvious possibility that many of you are about to die horribly before lunch. And according to medieval warfare rules, retreating without orders is forbidden. No matter how bad things become, this was one of the harshest expectations placed upon knights. Once battle began, you were expected to hold formation and obey commands until your lord ordered otherwise. Running early was considered cowardice, betrayal, and sometimes outright treason. Because medieval armies depended almost entirely on morale, battles during the Middle Ages were fragile things. Soldiers fought in close formations with limited communication, and almost no reliable battlefield control once combat fully started. If one group panicked and fled, nearby troops often followed immediately. Then the entire army collapsed. A retreat could transform into a massacre within minutes. Horses trampled fleeing men. Enemy cavalry chased down scattered soldiers. Archers targeted exposed backs. What began as organized warfare usually ended as exhausted people sprinting desperately through mud while trying not to become historical examples, which explains why commanders hated unauthorized retreats so much. Knights were expected to stand firm, even when situations became obviously catastrophic. If your banner remained standing, you stayed. If your lord kept fighting, you fought too. Even if common sense had quietly left the battlefield hours earlier, some medieval battles became horrifying slaughters precisely because nobles refused to retreat in time. Honor demanded resistance, pride demanded courage, and medieval aristocrats often preferred glorious disaster over practical survival. History is full of men confidently making terrible decisions while wearing decorative feathers. If a knight fled too early, punishment could be brutal. Lands might be confiscated, titles removed, public humiliation ceremonies sometimes followed, ensuring everyone across the region learned exactly who had failed in battle. And medieval people never forgot humiliation. Chroniclers recorded cowardice carefully, Songs mocked disgraced nobles for generations afterward. Entire family reputations could suffer because one terrified ancestor decided he valued breathing slightly more than social expectations. Honestly understandable. The cruelest part is that fear itself was completely rational. Battlefields were nightmares. Men screamed beneath horses. Arrows punched through armor gaps. Mud mixed with blood until the ground itself became dangerous. Once formations broke apart, survival depended partly on skill and mostly on chaos. Yet somehow, in the middle of all this, knights were expected to remain calm, disciplined, and loyal. As enemy cavalry begins advancing toward your line, the earth trembles beneath hundreds of charging horses. Every instinct in your body tells you to run. But the banner beside you still stands, so you stay exactly where you are, like a professional medieval lunatic. You arrive at the castle gates exhausted, soaked from rain, and smelling vaguely like wet horse and poor decisions. Your journey has lasted days. The roads were muddy, the inns questionable, and at one point you became reasonably certain a group of bandits was following you through the forest, before deciding you looked too heavily armed to be financially worth the effort. At last, the lord of this castle offers you hospitality, and according to medieval custom, refusing that offer would be deeply insulting. Hospitality rules were sacred across much of medieval Europe. Offering shelter, food, and protection to guests was considered both a noble duty and a demonstration of status. Great lords proved their power through generosity. Large feasts and open halls showed wealth, influence, and prestige. Essentially, medieval nobles competed with each other through aggressive dinner hosting. As a knight, accepting hospitality also came with responsibilities. Once inside another lord's hall, you were expected to behave respectfully. You did not start fights. You did not steal. You did not insult the host's family. And you definitely did not murder anyone during supper. This last rule proved surprisingly difficult for medieval society. Guests under a lord's protection were theoretically safe. Harming them violated sacred customs and damaged reputations badly. In many places, breaking hospitality laws was viewed as both dishonorable and sinful. Of course, medieval history contains countless examples of people ignoring this rule entirely. The most famous betrayals became legendary precisely because hospitality was supposed to guarantee safety. Noble guests lowered their guard inside great halls. Weapons might remain peace-bound. Wine flowed freely. Trust existed briefly. Then occasionally someone locked the doors and started killing people anyway, which really discouraged future dinner invitations. As a traveling knight, hospitality could mean survival. Roads were dangerous, winters brutal, and isolated travelers vulnerable to robbers or starvation. Castles, monasteries, and noble estates provided shelter across vast stretches of wilderness. Still, entering another lord's hall required caution, because hospitality also created obligations. If a powerful noble fed you, sheltered you, and treated you generously, he might later expect favors in return. Political alliances often formed over shared meals and comfortable guest chambers. Medieval diplomacy happened constantly around fireplaces. While everyone pretended conversations were casual, they were never casual. Every gesture mattered. Seating arrangements mattered. Toasts mattered. Which guests received better wine mattered. Entire political relationships could shift based on who sat closest to the lord during dinner. As servants finally place warm food before you inside the crowded hall, musicians begin playing softly nearby while nobles exchange polite smiles across candlelight. It all feels civilized, which, in medieval Europe, usually meant something terrible was only a few bad conversations away. You stand beneath a grey medieval sky wearing armor heavy enough to slowly compress your spine, while cold rain drips from the edge of your helmet. Around you, knights tighten saddle straps and murmur final prayers. Horses stamp nervously in the mud. Somewhere in the distance, church bells echo across the hills as another battle prepares to begin. And despite every survival instinct screaming inside your brain, you already know the rule that matters most. Your honor comes before your life. This belief sat at the center of medieval knighthood. Honor shaped everything. Your reputation determined whether other nobles trusted you, whether kings rewarded you, whether powerful families arranged marriages with your bloodline, and whether songs remembered your name proudly or mockingly after death. A knight without honor was socially ruined. And medieval society treated social ruin almost like a physical disease. This created an entire culture where appearance often mattered more than logic. Knights charged into impossible battles rather than appear cowardly. Nobles defended pointless grudges for decades because backing down looked weak. Men accepted duels they clearly should have avoided simply because public humiliation terrified them more than actual death, which is honestly one of the least efficient systems humanity has ever invented. Honor affected every part of your daily life. You had to speak carefully, fight bravely, dress properly, show loyalty publicly, remain calm under pressure, defend your family name constantly. Even small failures could stain reputations for years, and medieval people remembered everything. If your grandfather fled a battle 30 years earlier, someone at court would still mention it after enough wine, probably repeatedly. This obsession with honor also explains why medieval warfare became so reckless at times. Knights sought glory through visible courage. Charging first into danger earned admiration. Dying heroically could immortalize your reputation forever. Surviving sensibly while looking frightened accomplished very little socially. Poets did not write epic songs about cautious decision-making. The church attempted to shape knightly honor into moral behavior through chivalry, emphasizing protection of the weak, loyalty, and Christian virtue. Sometimes this worked beautifully. Other times, medieval knights burned villages over inheritance disputes and then donated money to monasteries afterward, hoping God appreciated the gesture. Human morality has always enjoyed creative contradictions. As rain continues falling around the battlefield, your horse shifts beneath you, while enemy banners appear faintly through the mist ahead. You are afraid. Of course you are. Anyone standing calmly before medieval combat without fear is either lying or suffering from a serious head injury. But no one around you can see that fear, because your armor hides your trembling hands. Your training hides your panic, and your entire world has taught you that dying honorably is preferable to living with shame. A belief both magnificent and deeply, deeply insane. In Norse mythology, the gods were not eternal beings floating comfortably above danger. They were powerful, yes. Worshipped, feared, occasionally dramatic beyond reason. But they were also doomed. From the very beginning, the universe carried a sentence already carved into its bones. One day, everything would end. The Norse called this ending Ragnarok. Not simply a war, not just a natural disaster. Ragnarok was the collapse of existence itself. The sky would crack open, mountains would fall, oceans would swallow the land, the sun would disappear into darkness, and the gods themselves would march knowingly toward their deaths. Imagine waking up every morning fully aware of the exact catastrophe waiting for you in the future. Then imagine still going to work anyway. That, in many ways, was the Norse divine experience. The story began in the vast emptiness known as Ginnunga Gap, a cold and silent void between two worlds. To one side burned Muspelheim, a realm of fire and unbearable heat. To the other stretched Niflheim, a land of ice, mist and rivers so cold they seemed almost lifeless. When fire and frost met within the void, they created the first living being, a giant named Ymir. Ymir was not a particularly charming beginning for humanity. He was enormous, ancient, and from his sweat emerged more giants. Because Norse mythology occasionally sounds like someone describing a fever dream after eating spoiled fish near a campfire. Alongside Ymir appeared a magical cow named Audumla, who survived by licking salty ice blocks. As she licked the frozen stones, she uncovered another being buried within the ice. Buri, ancestor of the gods. From Buri's bloodline eventually came Odin, Vili, and Ve, the brothers who decided the giant Ymir needed to die. Which he did, violently. The brothers killed Ymir and used his body to create the world. His flesh became the earth. His blood became the seas. His bones became mountains. His skull became the sky itself. It was a remarkably efficient recycling program, though perhaps not environmentally approved. Yet even as the gods built the world of Midgard and raised their golden halls in Asgard, prophecy already whispered through the universe. The Norns, mysterious beings who shaped fate beneath the roots of the great world tree Yggdrasil, knew the truth. The gods would not escape their destiny. Odin especially feared what was coming. He spent centuries searching for knowledge about Ragnarok, sacrificing an eye for wisdom and hanging himself upon Yggdrasil to uncover hidden secrets. Because nothing says stable leadership quite like a king repeatedly mutilating himself in pursuit of apocalypse research. And the worst part was this. Every prophecy agreed. Ragnarok could not be stopped, only delayed. Among all the Norse gods, none feared Ragnarok more than Odin, which was unfortunate because he also understood it better than anyone else. Odin was not the cheerful ruler many modern fantasy stories like to imagine. He was restless, suspicious, endlessly hungry for knowledge, and deeply aware that wisdom often arrived wrapped inside suffering. While other gods drank, feasted, and boasted about who killed the larger frost giant that week, Odin spent his existence trying to uncover fragments of the future, specifically the part where everyone died horribly. The problem was that prophecy in Norse mythology was not flexible. Fate was not a suggestion. The future existed like a road already laid across the earth. The gods could walk upon it, complain about it, perhaps scream dramatically into the northern wind, but they could not escape it. And Odin knew exactly what waited at the end. He learned pieces of Ragnarok from the Norns, the mysterious weavers of destiny who lived beneath Yggdrasil, the great world tree connecting the 9 realms. Their power frightened even the gods. They watered the roots of the tree each day, while quietly deciding the lifespan of kings, warriors, children, and entire civilizations. Imagine 3 ancient women calmly deciding the fate of the cosmos beside a giant tree, while everyone else pretends things are under control. That was essentially the Norse approach to cosmic management. Odin became consumed by the search for more knowledge. He sacrificed one of his eyes at the Well of Mimir in exchange for wisdom, leaving himself permanently one-eyed, but able to see deeper truths hidden from others. Later, he performed an even darker act. He hung himself from Yggdrasil for 9 days and nights, pierced by his own spear, starving and alone, all to discover the secrets of the runes. This was not symbolic in the comforting modern sense. Odin genuinely impaled and suspended himself from a cosmic tree in pursuit of knowledge. The Norse viewed wisdom as something earned through pain, sacrifice, and occasional self-inflicted torment. Libraries were apparently considered too convenient. Despite all this suffering, Odin never discovered a way to prevent Ragnarok. He only learned more details about how it would happen. He saw the wolf Fenrir breaking free from his chains. He saw the serpent Jormungandr rising from the sea. He saw the fires of Muspelheim consuming the heavens. Worst of all, he saw himself dying. And every day afterward, Odin continued ruling anyway, carrying the unbearable knowledge that the glorious halls of Asgard were essentially waiting for their appointment with destruction. If Ragnarok was a storm slowly gathering over the universe, then Loki was the crackling sound of thunder in the distance. Never fully trusted, never entirely predictable, and almost always one terrible decision away from disaster. Loki was not originally an enemy of the gods. In many stories, he lived among them in Asgard, sharing their feasts and adventures. He helped them at times with clever plans and impossible solutions. Unfortunately, he also caused most of the problems requiring solutions in the first place. Loki had the rare talent of creating disasters and then acting offended when people blamed him for them. Unlike the noble warrior gods, Loki represented chaos itself. He could change shape, deceive anyone, and twist situations into catastrophe with alarming speed. One day, he might save the gods from ruin. The next day, he might accidentally produce a horse with 8 legs, after a deeply confusing encounter involving shape-shifting. Norse mythology was not interested in explaining itself politely, but the true terror began with Loki's children. The gods learned of a prophecy foretelling that Loki's offspring would help bring about Ragnarok. Naturally, instead of handling this carefully, they reacted with the emotional restraint of frightened nobles hearing rumors at a banquet. Loki fathered 3 terrifying beings with the giantess Angerboda. The first was Fenrir, a monstrous wolf destined to kill Odin during Ragnarok. The second was Jormungandr, the great serpent cast into the sea surrounding Midgard, where it grew so large it encircled the entire world. The third was Hel, ruler of the realm of the dead, half living woman and half corpse. To the gods, these children were walking prophecies of doom. Odin attempted to control the threat before it matured. Jormungandr was hurled into the endless ocean, Hell was banished to rule over the dead beneath the earth. Fenrir alone remained in Asgard for a time, because the gods feared the destruction he might cause if challenged openly. At first, Fenrir appeared manageable. Young, enormous, admittedly alarming but manageable. Yet the wolf grew at an unnatural pace until even the gods feared approaching him. Only the war god Tyr possessed enough courage to feed the beast directly. Imagine being considered brave because you are the only person willing to hand dinner to a wolf prophesied to devour the king of the gods someday. Eventually the gods decided Fenrir had to be chained. Their first attempts failed instantly. The wolf shattered iron restraints as though they were threads. Finally, the dwarves forged Gleipnir, a magical binding made from impossible things. The sound of a cat's footsteps, the beard of a woman, the roots of mountains and other absurd ingredients that sounded less like metallurgy and more like a drunken riddle contest. Fenrir became suspicious, rightfully so, and suspicion, in Norse mythology, usually meant the apocalypse was getting closer. The gods of Asgard liked to imagine themselves as honourable rulers of the cosmos, brave warriors, defenders of order, noble guardians standing against chaos. Then came the matter of Fenrir, where they collectively abandoned honesty with the elegance of panicked politicians trapped inside a burning hall. By the time the great wolf reached adulthood, fear had spread through Asgard. Fenrir was no ordinary beast. His jaws could stretch impossibly wide, his strength surpassed nearly every god, and the prophecy surrounding him hung over the realm like smoke before a fire. Everyone knew the same terrible prediction. During Ragnarok, Fenrir would devour Odin himself. Naturally, the gods decided this was a perfect opportunity for deception. At first, they approached the wolf with games. They challenged Fenrir to test his strength against mighty chains, pretending admiration while secretly hoping to imprison him forever. The wolf agreed because at that point he still trusted them, which in hindsight was probably his first mistake. The gods forged a massive iron chain called lading. Fenrir allowed himself to be bound, then snapped the restraints apart effortlessly. So the gods created an even heavier chain named Dromi. Fenrir shattered that one too. This did very little to calm the nerves of immortal beings already terrified about being eaten alive in the future. Finally, the gods turned to the dwarves, master craftsmen capable of creating impossible objects. The dwarves forged Gleipnir, a magical ribbon thin as silk yet stronger than any iron chain. It was crafted from absurd ingredients: the sound of a cat's footsteps, the breath of a fish, the roots of mountains, and other things that technically do not exist, which was likely the point. When the gods presented Gleipnir, Fenrir immediately sensed something was wrong. The ribbon looked harmless, almost delicate, and the wolf accused the gods of trickery. Smart wolf! Fenrir agreed to wear the binding only if one of the gods placed a hand inside his mouth as a sign of good faith. Suddenly the hall grew very quiet. The mighty gods of Asgard, defenders of worlds, apparently developed an urgent interest in avoiding eye contact. Only Tyr stepped forward. Tyr, god of war and justice, placed his hand between Fenrir's enormous jaws while the ribbon tightened around the wolf. At first, Fenrir struggled confidently. Then panic began to rise. The chain would not break. The gods laughed with relief. Fenrir realized he had been betrayed, and with one violent snap of his jaws, Tyr lost his hand forever. From that moment onward, hatred consumed the wolf. Bound beneath the earth, Fenrir waited through the centuries for Ragnarok, growing stronger, angrier, and more certain that when the final battle arrived, the gods would finally pay for their fear. Before Ragnarok truly began, the world would first endure a nightmare called Fimbulwinter, a winter so brutal, so endless, that even the gods viewed it as the final warning before civilization collapsed completely. Not one winter, three endless years without summer, no harvests, no warmth, no relief, just snow, darkness, starvation, and humanity slowly tearing itself apart while the skies remained silent overhead, which, admittedly, already sounds unpleasant after about the first week. According to Norse prophecy, Fimbulwinter would arrive without warning. The sun would lose its strength. Bitter winds would sweep across Midgard, freezing rivers, forests, and fields beneath endless ice. Snowstorms would bury entire settlements. Crops would fail completely, and hunger would spread faster than war. Then came the truly terrifying part. People would stop caring about each other. The Norse believed Ragnarok would not begin with monsters rising from the sea or fiery giants marching across the sky. It would begin with human society collapsing under fear and desperation. Brothers would kill brothers. Families would turn against one another. Kings would betray their own people for survival. Every oath, every law, every fragile thread holding civilization together would snap. For the Vikings, this was one of the darkest horrors imaginable. Norse culture depended heavily on loyalty, kinship, and sworn honor. To live in a world where trust disappeared entirely was almost worse than death itself. A Viking could accept dying in battle. What terrified him was living long enough to watch neighbors become enemies over scraps of frozen food. The wolves, Skull and Hearty, would also finally catch the sun and moon after eternally chasing them across the heavens. Darkness would swallow the sky, leaving the world trapped beneath cold shadows. No stars, no warmth, just endless night, and the sound of people desperately trying to survive. Meanwhile, beneath the earth and sea, the enemies of the gods prepared themselves. Fenrir strained against his magical bonds, growing more violent with every passing year. Jormungandr stirred within the oceans surrounding Midgard, thrashing beneath the waves so violently that storms battered the shores of the world. In Helheim, the dead gathered silently beneath the rule of Hel, waiting for the moment they would march again. And above it all sat Odin, watching the signs unfold one by one exactly as prophecy had promised. That was the cruelest part of Ragnarok. Nothing arrived unexpectedly. The gods recognized every warning, every storm, every death, every frozen season. They understood perfectly what was happening and still could do nothing to stop it. Imagine ruling the universe while slowly watching a checklist of apocalypse predictions become accurate in real time. Even Odin, wisest among the gods, could only prepare for the inevitable, because Fimbulwinter was not the end itself. It was merely the sound of the universe inhaling before the final scream. After the long horror of Fimbulwinter, the world finally began to crack apart. Not metaphorically, literally. Mountains split open. The earth trembled beneath violent earthquakes. Forests collapsed into ravines, and the seas crashed against the shores with unnatural fury. Across the 9 realms, ancient prisons forged by the gods started to fail one by one. Ragnarok had moved beyond prophecy now. The end had physically arrived, and the first thing the universe did was release its monsters. Deep beneath the earth, Fenrir finally broke free from Gleipnir. The magical ribbon that once held him snapped apart after centuries of strain. The wolf emerged enormous beyond imagination, his body stretching across the land while flames burned from his eyes and nostrils. Some legends claimed his jaws opened so wide that the upper half touched the sky, while the lower scraped against the earth, which, admittedly, would make conversation difficult. Fenrir raced across the world, devouring everything in his path. Entire armies vanished beneath his jaws. Villages disappeared into fire and blood. The gods had spent ages trying to prevent this exact moment, and now the beast they had betrayed was loose at the precise worst possible time. Meanwhile, the oceans erupted violently as Jormungandr rose from the sea. The great serpent uncoiled itself from around Midgard, sending tidal waves crashing onto the shores of the world. Poison poured from its mouth into the sky and oceans, spreading death across the land. The creature was so vast that when it moved, storms formed around its body like living shadows. At the same time, chaos spread from Helheim itself. The dead began marching from the underworld under the command of Hel. Warriors, kings, criminals, forgotten souls. Endless ranks of the dead moving silently toward the final battle. Their ship, Naglfar, sailed from the underworld, carrying the armies of death across black waters. And then came Loki. After centuries bound beneath the earth as punishment for his crimes against the gods, Loki escaped his prison during the earthquakes. The trickster who once laughed beside the gods now marched openly against them, leading giants and monsters toward Asgard itself. The bond between Loki and the gods had rotted into hatred long ago, and now the universe prepared to settle the debt in blood. From Muspelheim came the fire giants led by Surtur, ancient destroyer of worlds. His flaming sword burned brighter than the sun itself as he advanced toward the battlefield. And above all this destruction echoed the sound of Gjallarhorn. The watchman god Heimdall had seen the enemy approaching. Standing at the edge of the Rainbow Bridge Bifrost, he sounded the great horn whose blast shook every realm awake. The final battle had begun. Even the gods, for all their power, now marched toward deaths they had foreseen for centuries. When Ragnarok finally arrived, there were no miracles waiting to save the gods, no hidden army descending from the heavens, no last-minute prophecy revealing that everything had been misunderstood. The Norse universe offered no comforting escape route. The gods marched toward battle fully aware they were marching toward death. Across the plain of Vigrid, the armies of chaos gathered beneath blackened skies. Giants from Jotunheim advanced beside the dead from Helheim. Flames from Muspelheim lit the horizon red, while poison from Jormungandr spread through the air and sea. Above the battlefield, the stars vanished one by one into darkness. Then the gods rode out from Asgard for the last time. At their head came Odin, wearing golden armor and carrying his spear Gungnir. Beside him rode the warriors of Valhalla, the Einherjar, dead heroes gathered for centuries to fight at the end of the world. Vikings had dreamed of joining this final battle for generations. Unfortunately, the prophecy also suggested most of them were about to have a very disappointing afternoon. Thor marched next, gripping Mjolnir with thunder shaking around him. Tyr advanced one-handed toward the battlefield. Heimdall stood ready beside the Rainbow Bridge. Even the gods who knew they could not survive still chose to fight. That mattered deeply in Norse belief. Courage was not measured by victory. Courage meant standing against impossible odds anyway. The battle erupted with catastrophic violence. Odin charged directly toward Fenrir, the great wolf he had feared for centuries. The beast attacked with unstoppable fury, jaws wide enough to swallow the sky itself. Odin fought bravely, but prophecy could not be escaped. Fenrir devoured the king of the gods, exactly as fate had promised. The death of Odin shook the battlefield, but vengeance followed immediately. Odin's son Vidar stepped forward wearing a magical shoe crafted through ages from scraps of leather discarded by humanity. Strange detail, admittedly. Ragnarok occasionally feels like mythology assembled by exhausted blacksmiths during winter storms. Vidar forced Fenrir's jaws apart and killed the wolf, avenging his father. Elsewhere, Thor battled Jormungandr in a clash so violent it poisoned the heavens. Thunder cracked across the sky as hammer and serpent collided again and again. Thor finally crushed the monster's skull with Mjolnir, achieving the greatest victory of the battle. Then he took 9 steps and died from the serpent's poison. One by one the gods fell. Tyr killed the Houndgarm before dying himself. Heimdall and Loki slew each other in mutual destruction. The defenders of the cosmos were collapsing exactly as prophecy demanded, and still the fire had not yet come. By the time the last gods began to fall, the universe itself was already dying. The battlefield of Vigrid had become a landscape of smoke, shattered weapons, blood, and fire. Corpses of giants lay beside dead gods, while poisoned winds swept across the ruins of the world. The great Rainbow Bridge Bifrost had collapsed beneath the invading armies. And Asgard, once the shining fortress of the gods, stood exposed to destruction. Then came Surtur. Among all the beings feared in Norse mythology, Surtur was perhaps the most terrifying because he represented something unstoppable. Destruction itself. He was older than many of the gods, ruler of Muspelheim, the realm of eternal fire. Throughout the ages he had waited silently at the edge of existence with a flaming sword in his hand, watching the universe move slowly toward its appointed death. And now his moment had arrived. Surtur marched across the broken battlefield surrounded by fire giants, his sword burning brighter than the sun. Wherever he stepped, flames spread across the earth. Forests erupted instantly into ash. Rivers boiled. Mountains cracked apart beneath unbearable heat. After centuries of freezing terror during Fimbulwinter, the world now swung violently into fire and ruin. The Norse did not imagine the apocalypse as one clean disaster. Ragnarok was collapsed from every direction at once. Ice, fire, earthquakes, monsters, war, poison. The complete failure of cosmic order itself. As Surtur advanced, even the surviving gods could not stop him. Most were already dead. The few remaining warriors fought desperately among collapsing ruins while flames climbed into the heavens. The great world tree Yggdrasil trembled violently as the 9 realms began to burn around its roots and branches. Midgard, the world of humanity, disappeared beneath oceans of flame and smoke. Entire kingdoms vanished. The seas swallowed the coasts while ash darkened the skies overhead. Nothing built by gods or men could survive. And yet, strangely, the Norse did not describe this ending with hopelessness alone. That is what makes Ragnarok different from many other apocalyptic stories. The universe was doomed, yes. The gods failed, yes. But destruction was never viewed as meaningless. The Norse believed endings were part of existence itself. Winter always came before spring. Worlds could die and still give birth to something new afterward. So as Surtur's flames consumed the cosmos, prophecy revealed one final truth. The world would rise again. After the fires faded and the seas settled, a new earth would emerge from the water, green and fertile. Some gods would survive the destruction. A few human beings would endure hidden within the shelter of Yggdrasil. The sun itself would have a daughter who would cross the heavens after her mother's death. Even after the apocalypse, life continued, which is honestly one of the most stubbornly human ideas imaginable. The Norse looked directly at the certainty of death, and still insisted that something beautiful might exist afterward. After the fires of Surtur finally faded, silence settled over the ruins of creation. No roaring armies, no thunder from the gods, no crashing seas or screams from the battlefield of Vigrid. The old world with all its kingdoms and prophecies was gone. The heavens had burned, the earth had drowned, even mighty Asgard had fallen into ruin. And yet the universe did not remain empty. Slowly, the waters receded. From the sea rose a new earth, green and untouched, shining beneath fresh sunlight. Forests began growing again across hills no army had marched upon. Rivers flowed clean through valleys no king had claimed. The air itself seemed calmer, as though existence had survived a long fever, and finally awakened into peace. This was the strange hope hidden inside Norse mythology. Ragnarok was not simply destruction. It was renewal through destruction. The old world had to collapse so another could emerge from its ashes. The Norse understood something many civilizations feared admitting. Nothing lasts forever. Not kingdoms, not gods, not even the cosmos itself. But endings were not always final. Several gods survived the apocalypse. Vidar and Vali, sons of Odin, endured beyond the final battle. Modi and Magni, sons of Thor, survived as well, and inherited Mjolnir after their father's death. Imagine discovering you inherited the most famous hammer in mythology immediately after the apocalypse. A complicated family estate, certainly. Most surprisingly of all, Balder returned. Before Ragnarok, Balder had been the beloved god of light and purity whose death signaled the beginning of the end. His murder shattered the peace of the gods and pushed the universe toward catastrophe. Yet after Ragnarok, Balder emerged once more into the renewed world beside his brother Hoder, reconciled after centuries of tragedy. Even the sun returned. During Ragnarok, the great wolf Skoll devoured the sun itself, plunging the world into darkness. But before her death, the sun goddess gave birth to a daughter who carried her light forward into the new heavens. The next world would not be entirely different from the old one. It would carry fragments of what came before, and humanity survived too. Two humans, Lif and Lifthrasir, endured Ragnarok by hiding within the sheltering branches of Yggdrasil. There, while gods and monsters destroyed the world outside, they quietly survived long enough to begin humanity again in the renewed earth. It is fitting that Norse mythology ends not with kings or warriors, but with survivors. Because at its heart, Ragnarok reflected the world the Vikings knew intimately. Harsh winters, endless wars, sudden death. Entire communities erased by famine or violence. Life was fragile, uncertain, and often cruel. But still people planted crops after winter. Still ships sailed after storms. Still children were born after funerals. The Norse looked at a universe doomed to destruction and answered with the most stubborn form of courage imaginable. Continue anyway. Before sunrise touches the rooftops of Rome, the wealthy household is already awake. Not the master of the house, of course. That would be absurd. Wealth in ancient Rome largely meant convincing other people to wake up early, so you did not have to. The first sounds drift through the domus while the streets outside still sit in darkness. Slaves shuffle quietly across mosaic floors, carrying oil lamps through the halls. In the kitchen, servants grind grain for bread, while others prepare watered wine, fruit, cheese, and small dishes for the family's morning meal. Somewhere in the courtyard, a sleepy servant curses softly after being splashed by freezing water from the household fountain. Rome, despite all its marble statues and imperial glory, still functioned mainly because exhausted people kept carrying buckets before dawn. The domus itself stands as a performance of wealth long before visitors even arrive. The atrium gleams with polished marble. Bronze lamps hang beside painted walls displaying scenes from mythology. The household shrine, the lararium, waits quietly near the centre of the home where small offerings will soon be made to the family gods. Every object exists partly for comfort and partly to remind guests that this family possesses money, influence, and enough free time to decorate walls with imported Greek art. Eventually the paterfamilias rises. The head of the household does not merely govern his family. Roman law grants him enormous authority over nearly everyone under his roof. Wife, children, servants, freedmen, and dependents. In theory, he controls the household absolutely. In practice, much of his day involves pretending he controls things, while dozens of servants quietly solve problems behind the scenes. A servant helps him dress in a spotless tunic bordered carefully according to his status. Another arranges his sandals. Grooming matters enormously, because wealthy Romans treat appearance almost like a political campaign. Hair trimmed properly, beard shaped carefully, clothing bright but not too extravagant. You want neighbours to think, "What a respectable and disciplined Roman citizen," rather than, "This man definitely bathes in perfume and bankrupts himself importing peacocks." Meanwhile, the mistress of the house oversees the domestic world already moving around her. Female servants receive instructions for the day. Meals are planned, fabrics inspected, children prepared for tutors. Nothing inside a wealthy Roman home happens accidentally. As the sun finally rises over Rome, light spills into the atrium through the open roof. Outside, the streets begin filling with merchants, labourers, senators, priests and beggars. Inside the domus, however, the real business of status has only just begun, because for wealthy Romans, daily life was never simply about living well. It was about being seen living well. Once the household had awakened and the first prayers were offered at the family shrine, the wealthy Roman man prepared for one of the most important performances of his day. The salutatio. This was the morning greeting ritual where clients arrived at the domus to pay their respects to their patron. On paper, it looked dignified and honourable. In reality, it often resembled an exhausted crowd of men standing outside someone's house at sunrise, hoping for small favours, free food, or political protection. Ancient Rome had many achievements. Personal boundaries were not among them. By early morning, the entrance of the domus filled with visitors wrapped in togas. Some were poor citizens seeking assistance. Others were businessmen hoping for introductions or contracts. A few simply wanted to maintain connections with an influential family, because Roman society operated almost entirely through relationships, obligations, and carefully managed loyalty. The patron-client system held the Republic and later the Empire together like an enormous web of favours. A wealthy Roman provided money, legal support, opportunities, or public backing. In return, clients offered respect, political support, and public admiration. Ideally, it was mutual cooperation. Less ideally, it was a daily reminder that survival in Rome depended heavily on knowing powerful people. The paterfamilias entered the atrium dressed carefully for the occasion. His toga, bright and expertly folded, announced his status before he even spoke. Roman elites treated clothing almost like military armour. A single stain or poorly arranged fold could damage the image of dignity they worked tirelessly to maintain. Imagine spending half an hour arranging fabric simply to look effortlessly respectable. Civilization truly advances in mysterious ways. As clients approached one by one, greetings were exchanged. Names mattered enormously. Forgetting someone's name could insult an ally or offend a voter. Wealthy Romans often relied on slaves called nomenclators, whose entire job involved whispering people's names into their master's ear before conversations. Essentially, ancient Rome invented human reminder notifications. Some clients received sportuli, small baskets containing food, coins, or gifts. Others requested favours directly, a cousin needing legal help, a merchant seeking investment, a politician asking for support in an upcoming vote. The domus became less a private home and more a crowded centre of business and influence before the morning had even fully begun. Meanwhile, servants moved constantly through the halls carrying documents, refreshments, and messages between rooms. Secretaries prepared correspondence while stewards tracked household expenses. Behind every calm display of Roman authority stood a swarm of labour keeping the illusion intact. An illusion mattered deeply. A wealthy Roman was expected to appear disciplined, generous, connected, and successful at all times. Even financial trouble had to be hidden behind polished marble floors and confident smiles. Bankruptcy in Rome often arrived dressed in imported perfume while hosting elaborate dinner parties. By the end of the Salutatio, the patron had reinforced dozens of social bonds before breakfast was fully settled in his stomach. Only then could the rest of the day begin. For a wealthy Roman family, comfort was not a personal achievement. It was a machine powered entirely by other human beings. Behind the polished marble walls of the domus lived an army of servants and slaves performing the endless labour required to maintain aristocratic life. The fountains sparkled because someone scrubbed them. The food appeared because someone prepared it before dawn. The expensive tunics remained spotless because someone washed them by hand without the modern miracle of detergent, plumbing, or mercy. Roman luxury depended on invisible exhaustion. Some households owned only a handful of slaves. Truly wealthy families, however, might possess dozens or even hundreds. Every task inside the home belonged to someone specific. Cooks prepared meals over smoking charcoal fires. Cleaners swept the floors constantly. Gardeners maintained courtyards filled with flowers and statues. Personal attendants dressed the family, arranged hairstyles, carried messages, and sometimes slept near their masters' rooms in case they were summoned during the night. Imagine being awakened because a senator suddenly remembered he wanted different sandals. Particularly trusted slaves could hold positions of remarkable responsibility. Greek slaves often worked as tutors, educating children in philosophy, rhetoric, mathematics, and literature. Secretaries managed correspondence and financial records. Stewards supervised the entire household staff, essentially functioning as managers of miniature private kingdoms. Some slaves even handled business affairs on behalf of their masters. Roman society could trust a man to oversee large financial operations while still legally considering him property. The contradictions of Roman civilization were occasionally astonishing. Yet despite the elegance surrounding the upper classes, life for many servants remained harsh and uncertain. Punishments could be brutal. Privacy barely existed. A slave's value depended entirely on usefulness, obedience, and the mood of the household above them. One mistake during an important dinner could lead to beatings, humiliation, or worse. And still, the household demanded perfection. The wealthy Roman family existed in a constant performance of superiority. Floors had to shine. Meals had to impress guests. Clothing had to appear fresh and expensive. Even the atmosphere of the home required careful management. Perfumes drifted through rooms. Lamps remained polished. Exotic animals sometimes wandered courtyards simply because owning a peacock apparently felt necessary for social prestige. Meanwhile, the servants moved quietly through the background, making this illusion possible. The irony was impossible to ignore. Roman aristocrats celebrated discipline, dignity, and virtue while relying completely on unseen labor to maintain their image of effortless refinement. A senator might spend hours discussing Stoic philosophy, while 3 exhausted servants adjusted his dining room cushions nearby. Some masters treated their servants relatively well, especially trusted household slaves who had served families for decades. Others ruled through fear alone. Much depended on personality, wealth, and circumstance. But regardless of kindness or cruelty, one truth remained constant inside every wealthy Roman domus. The comfort of the few rested entirely upon the labor of the many, and everyone in the house understood it, even if polite society preferred not to mention it during dinner. By midday, the wealthy Roman household had transformed from a private residence into something closer to a political headquarters. The paterfamilias rarely spent his day relaxing beside fountains eating grapes one at a time like modern films enjoy suggesting. A rich Roman man, especially one involved in politics or business, lived inside a constant storm of negotiations, favors, contracts, and carefully managed relationships. Rome was an empire built not only on armies, but on conversations held in courtyards, bathhouses, and dining rooms between men pretending not to desperately need each other. After the morning salutatio, many aristocrats left the domus to attend the Forum Romanum, the beating heart of Roman public life. The forum was noisy, crowded, and overflowing with activity. Senators debated laws beneath marble columns while merchants shouted prices nearby. Lawyers argued cases before impatient crowds. Priests carried out rituals as beggars drifted through the streets asking for coins. Somewhere in the chaos, at least one politician was almost certainly lying with complete confidence. For wealthy Romans, public visibility mattered enormously. A senator or businessman needed to be seen constantly. Walking through the forum surrounded by clients reinforced social status. Every greeting, handshake, or public conversation became part of an invisible competition for influence. Reputation in Rome functioned almost like currency. Lose enough of it and doors closed very quickly. Business itself took many forms. Some aristocratic families owned farmland across Italy, producing olive oil, wine, and grain. Others invested in shipping, mining, construction, or tax collection. Officially, Roman elites often pretended to dislike direct commerce because traditional Roman values praised land ownership above trade. Unofficially, many wealthy families made enormous fortunes through complicated business arrangements, while loudly insisting they remained honourable gentlemen above such things. A remarkable level of Roman politics involved maintaining appearances while doing the exact opposite behind closed doors. Back at the domus, clerks and secretaries managed correspondence throughout the afternoon. Wax tablets filled with financial records moved between rooms while messengers arrived carrying updates from estates, ports, or provincial governors. A wealthy Roman household operated almost like a small corporation held together by slaves, freedmen, and endless paperwork. Visitors continued arriving all day. One man sought investment in a merchant voyage to Alexandria. Another requested legal protection after offending a rival family. A politician quietly proposed an alliance before the next election. Every favor created obligation. Every obligation strengthened networks of loyalty. Rome's elite survived through these invisible chains of debt and support, and failure carried consequences. A powerful Roman who lost influence could quickly find former allies disappearing. Clients would attach themselves to stronger patrons. Rivals spread rumors eagerly through the city. Political disgrace in Rome moved with astonishing speed, often accompanied by dramatic speeches about morality from men committing identical crimes elsewhere. By evening, the paterfamilias returned home exhausted, but outwardly composed. Because in Roman high society, appearing calm under pressure was essential, even when your entire career depended on 1,000 fragile relationships that could collapse over one badly timed insult at dinner. Inside the wealthy Roman household, the wife of the paterfamilias occupied a strange and delicate position. Officially, Roman society expected elite women to embody modesty, dignity, fertility, and discipline. In reality, many wealthy Roman women managed enormous households, supervised servants, arranged marriages, influenced political alliances, controlled property, and quietly shaped family fortunes behind the scenes. They simply had to do all this while appearing graceful and unthreatening enough not to alarm fragile male egos. Roman respectability was above all a performance. The ideal Roman matron dressed carefully but not excessively. Her clothing displayed wealth without suggesting vanity. Her jewelry hinted at status without appearing vulgar. Hair mattered enormously. Elaborate hairstyles involving braids, pins, curls, and imported cosmetics became symbols of aristocratic life. Entire servant teams might spend hours arranging a noblewoman's appearance each morning. Ancient Rome conquered much of the known world, yet somehow still required 3 attendants and half a day to organize one hairstyle. The mistress of the domus supervised nearly every domestic operation. She oversaw food supplies, textile production, household accounts, and the management of female servants. Wealthy Roman women often directed spinning, weaving, and clothing production, even when servants performed most of the labor themselves. Publicly, this reinforced the image of the hard-working, virtuous Roman wife devoted to family duty. Privately, many elite women wielded considerable influence. A politically connected wife could strengthen alliances between powerful families through marriage ties, social gatherings, and private negotiations. Conversations held during banquets or religious festivals often mattered just as much as speeches delivered in the Senate. Roman men controlled official politics, but elite women frequently shaped the social world surrounding it. Mothers also carried enormous responsibility for preserving family reputation. Children from noble households were expected to display discipline, education, and refinement from an early age. A badly behaved son reflected poorly upon his mother. A daughter's future marriage prospects depended heavily on the household's image of dignity and stability. Every dinner, festival, and public appearance became another opportunity for Roman society to observe and judge. And Roman society judged constantly. Rumors spread through aristocratic circles with astonishing speed. Affairs, scandals, gambling debts, drunkenness, or family disputes quickly became public gossip. Respectability in Rome could crack apart overnight beneath whispers exchanged in bathhouses and banquet halls. The elite spent enormous energy pretending their households remained perfectly orderly, while chaos simmered quietly beneath the surface. Some women embraced the expectations placed upon them, others pushed against them fiercely. Figures like Livia Drusilla, wife of Augustus, became immensely influential through intelligence, political instinct, and careful public image. She mastered the Roman art of appearing modest, while quietly helping shape imperial power itself, because that was often the true skill required of wealthy Roman women. Not simply obedience, but learning how to exercise power invisibly inside a society deeply uncomfortable, admitting women possessed any at all. For wealthy Roman families, children were not simply loved and raised. They were prepared. Every son and daughter born into an aristocratic household carried the weight of the family's future reputation. A noble child represented legacy, political survival, inheritance, and social ambition, wrapped inside a very expensive little tunic. From the moment they could walk and speak, Roman children were shaped carefully into future adults expected to preserve the honor of the household, and Roman parenting could be extraordinarily strict. Young boys from wealthy families often began formal education early under private tutors, many of whom were educated Greek slaves. Greek culture fascinated Roman elites, who admired Greek philosophy, literature, science, and rhetoric, while simultaneously conquering Greece militarily. Rome had a remarkable ability to defeat civilizations, and then immediately hire them as teachers. Children studied reading, writing, mathematics, history, and especially rhetoric. Public speaking mattered enormously in Roman society. A future senator or magistrate needed to command crowds, defend legal arguments, and survive political debates without humiliating himself publicly. Roman schools therefore placed heavy emphasis on memorization, debate, and delivering speeches with confidence, or at least with enough confidence to hide panic convincingly. Boys from elite households also learned discipline through physical training, riding horses, practicing with weapons, swimming, and athletic exercises prepared them for military service later in life. Roman masculinity valued endurance, self-control, and toughness above nearly everything else. Complaining openly about discomfort was deeply frowned upon. The empire expected its future leaders to remain calm, whether facing political disaster or freezing rain in a military camp somewhere near the edge of civilization. Girls received education too, though usually focused more heavily on domestic management, religion, music, and social etiquette. Wealthy daughters needed to become respectable wives, capable of running influential households and producing strong family alliances through marriage. Some elite women became highly educated in literature and philosophy, but Roman society generally preferred intelligent women to display their intelligence carefully and without threatening male authority too directly. The household itself functioned as a constant classroom. Children observed how their father greeted clients, managed servants, negotiated favors, and maintained dignity in public. They watched their mother oversee domestic life, host guests, and protect the family's reputation. Roman values were taught less through affection and more through repetition, expectation, and example. Punishment was common. Roman fathers possessed enormous legal authority over their children, and discipline could be severe. Tutors carried staffs for corporal punishment. Mistakes, laziness, or disrespect often met harsh correction. because aristocratic families believed weakness invited humiliation in Roman society. Yet despite the strictness, family pride remained deeply important. A successful son brought glory to generations of ancestors. A well-married daughter strengthened the family's future. Every achievement reflected not only personal success, but the honor of the entire household stretching backward through time. Because in ancient Rome, children did not entirely belong to themselves. They belonged partly to the family name, and maintaining that name mattered more than almost anything else in the world. By late afternoon, much of wealthy Roman society drifted toward one of the empire's greatest obsessions, the baths. Not merely for cleanliness, of course. Romans certainly appreciated bathing, but the thermae functioned as far more than giant public washrooms. They were social clubs, business centers, political arenas, exercise grounds, gossip networks, and public theaters of status, all wrapped together beneath marble ceilings and clouds of steam. A wealthy Roman man could spend hours there every day. The great bath complexes of Rome were enormous architectural achievements filled with heated pools, cold plunges, exercise courts, gardens, libraries, and decorated halls lined with statues. Water flowed constantly through sophisticated aqueduct systems, while slaves worked endlessly behind the walls, feeding furnaces to heat entire rooms from beneath the floors. Ancient Rome occasionally feels less like the ancient world, and more like a civilization that accidentally misplaced modern plumbing somewhere around the 5th century. Upon arriving at the baths, aristocrats greeted friends, political allies, and rivals alike. Conversations began casually, while servants carried towels, oils, and fresh clothing behind them. Beneath the relaxed atmosphere, however, every interaction mattered. Deals were discussed quietly beside pools. Political rumors spread through steam-filled chambers. Scandals moved across the city faster than the water flowing through the aqueducts. A senator's failed speech, a governor accused of corruption, a marriage rumored to be collapsing, a general seeking support for higher office. Roman gossip was not harmless entertainment. Information itself held political power, and the baths became one of the empire's greatest unofficial communication networks. Public reputation remained everything. A wealthy Roman needed to appear confident, cultured, disciplined, and socially connected at all times. Even leisure became performance. How you spoke, dressed, exercised, and interacted with others shaped how society judged you. Too arrogant, and people resented you. Too modest, and rivals sensed weakness. Roman elite life resembled a permanent balancing act performed in expensive sandals. Meanwhile, the baths also revealed Rome's obsession with status distinctions. The wealthy often attended private sections or arrived with entourages of servants carrying perfumes, oils, and refreshments. Some aristocrats practically transformed bathing into a royal procession. Others criticized such extravagance publicly, while secretly competing to outdo one another in luxury. Roman morality frequently depended on condemning excess while privately enjoying it immensely. Women attended baths as well, though often at separate times or in different facilities depending on the city and period. Elite Roman women also used these spaces to exchange news, arrange marriages, discuss household affairs, and monitor the shifting alliances of aristocratic society. Because everywhere in Rome, social life and politics blended together completely. By the time evening approached, many wealthy Romans had already conducted half a day's worth of networking inside warm pools and echoing marble halls. Then they returned home to prepare for the true centerpiece of aristocratic Roman life, the dinner banquet. And in Rome, dinner was never simply about food. As sunset spread across the rooftops of Rome, lamps flickered alive inside the wealthy domus, and servants hurried through the halls preparing for the most theatrical event of the day, the cena, the evening banquet. For aristocratic Romans, dinner was not merely a meal. It was a performance of wealth, education, power, and social dominance conducted while reclining sideways and attempting to appear effortlessly sophisticated. Entire political alliances could strengthen or collapse between courses of roasted meat and diluted wine. Guests arrived dressed carefully in fresh tunics and perfumes imported from distant provinces. At the entrance, servants collected sandals dusty from the streets, while musicians tuned instruments somewhere deeper inside the house. The dining room, or triclinium, glowed beneath oil lamps reflecting against painted walls and polished silver dishes. Everything had been arranged to impress. The host reclined on cushioned couches beside his closest guests according to status and importance. Seating mattered enormously. Being placed near the host signalled favour and prestige. Being placed farther away quietly announced your position in the social hierarchy. Roman dinner parties often resembled polite psychological warfare with wine. Servants moved constantly through the room carrying trays of food in carefully timed waves. Wealthy Romans prided themselves on exotic ingredients gathered from across the empire. Oysters, dormice, figs, olives, honey cakes, fish sauces, imported spices, and roasted meats decorated elaborately for display. Some aristocrats became obsessed with culinary extravagance, serving dishes shaped like mythical creatures or presenting rare animals simply because they could. Nothing says stable civilization quite like arguing about philosophy, while someone unveils an elaborately seasoned peacock nearby. Entertainment accompanied the meal continuously. Musicians played softly while poets recited verses for approval. Dancers performed between courses. Philosophical debates emerged beside drunken gossip and political discussions. Educated Romans admired Greek culture deeply, so wealthy guests often quoted Greek literature or discussed Stoic philosophy during dinner to display refinement, at least until the wine reached its later stages. Then conversations usually became louder, more emotional, and significantly less philosophical. Behind the spectacle, however, tension always lingered. Every guest evaluated the success of the banquet. Was the food impressive enough? Were the servants efficient? Did the host appear generous or desperate for attention? Roman aristocrats judged one another relentlessly through these gatherings. A poorly organized dinner could damage social standing. A magnificent banquet strengthened prestige across the city by the next morning. Meanwhile, servants worked almost invisibly beneath the glow of aristocratic luxury. Slaves refilled cups, removed dishes, cleaned spills, lit lamps, and endured endless demands while trying not to attract anger or humiliation from intoxicated guests. As the evening deepened, the atmosphere softened into heavy conversation and drifting smoke from oil lamps. Outside the domus, Rome's streets grew darker and quieter. Inside, however, the wealthy still reclined among wine cups and fading music, savouring the final hours of another carefully staged day. Because in ancient Rome, status did not sleep early. As the banquet finally wound down and the last guests disappeared into the lamplit streets of Rome, the wealthy household slowly exhaled. The music faded first. Then came the scraping of couches, the quiet murmurs of drunken farewells, and the soft clatter of empty cups being gathered by exhausted servants. Oil lamps flickered low against painted walls, while the smell of wine, perfume, roasted meat, and smoke lingered heavily through the triclinium. Another evening of Roman aristocratic theatre had ended successfully. No public insults, no political disasters, no guest vomiting directly onto the imported mosaic floor. By Roman standards, an excellent night. The paterfamilias retired deeper into the domus, often accompanied by a trusted servant carrying lamps ahead through darkened corridors. Before sleeping, many Romans visited the household shrine once more, offering brief prayers to the Lares and Penates, the protective spirits believed to guard the home and family. Religion in Rome existed everywhere, not only in temples and ceremonies, but woven quietly into ordinary daily routines. Meanwhile, the household itself remained awake far longer than its masters. Servants still had work to finish. Tables needed cleaning. Leftover food stored carefully. Floors swept. Lamps extinguished room by room. Kitchens scrubbed after hours of cooking beside burning charcoal fires. Some slaves prepared clothing for the following morning, while others secured doors and checked storerooms. The luxury enjoyed upstairs rested upon labour continuing long after the wealthy had gone to sleep. Outside, Rome itself never fully rested. In ancient Greece, hair was never just hair. A simple braid, a trimmed beard, or a loose curl resting against the shoulder could quietly reveal a person's age, status, gender, grief, wealth, or place within society. Greeks viewed hair almost like a language woven directly onto the body. Without speaking a single word, someone's hairstyle could announce whether they were a child, a warrior, a bride, a mourner, or a slave. And naturally, the Greeks took this very seriously. The cities of ancient Greece overflowed with carefully maintained appearances. In Athens, Sparta, Corinth, and countless smaller settlements, grooming reflected ideas about beauty, discipline, and civilization itself. Greeks admired balance and harmony in nearly everything: architecture, philosophy, sculpture, and even hairstyles. The ideal appearance was meant to seem elegant without appearing excessive, though human vanity has historically struggled with moderation since roughly the invention of polished bronze mirrors. For men, hair and beards symbolized maturity and dignity. Young boys often wore their hair long before eventually cutting it during important rites of passage into adulthood. Adult men commonly grew beards as signs of wisdom, masculinity, and social respectability. Philosophers became especially associated with flowing beards, partly because wisdom apparently looked more convincing when attached to dramatic facial hair. Meanwhile, women's hair carried enormous symbolic importance throughout Greek society. Most respectable women wore their hair long, often styled into braids, knots, or carefully arranged curls, held in place with ribbons, pins, or cloth bands. Wealthier women spent significant time arranging their appearance, assisted by servants or female attendants. Hair oils scented with olive oil, herbs, and perfumes helped soften and style the hair beneath the Mediterranean sun. Greek art preserved these ideals everywhere. Statues of gods and goddesses displayed intricate waves and curls carved carefully into marble. Vase paintings showed noble women adjusting elaborate hairstyles while warriors tied back their hair before battle. Even the gods themselves reflected Greek beauty standards. Apollo appeared youthful with flowing curls, while Athena wore controlled, dignified hair beneath her helmet. But hairstyles were not merely about beauty. Hair also played important roles in religion, mourning, marriage, and sacrifice. Locks of hair might be dedicated to the gods before adulthood. Brides arranged their hair carefully for wedding ceremonies symbolizing transition into married life. During funerals, mourners cut their hair short or tore at it publicly to express grief. To the Greeks, hair represented both identity and transformation. It changed as life changed. A child's curls would not remain the same forever. A warrior returning from battle might appear altered. A widow's hair could become a visible sign of sorrow. Through every stage of life, the body itself carried symbols society immediately understood. And among those symbols, few were more personal or more visible than the hair upon one's head. In ancient Greece, childhood did not last forever. Society expected boys and girls to move steadily toward adulthood, marriage, duty, and social responsibility. Hair became one of the clearest visible markers of that journey. A Greek child's hairstyle often revealed exactly where they stood in life. Young boys commonly wore their hair long during childhood, sometimes falling in soft curls around the shoulders. These curls symbolized youth, innocence, and the protection of the gods during the vulnerable early years of life. On painted pottery and carved reliefs, Greek children often appear almost angelic by modern standards, with carefully styled hair and delicate features, which is slightly ironic, considering many of them were probably running barefoot through dusty streets 5 minutes earlier, causing chaos near olive stalls. Families cared deeply about children's hair. Mothers and female servants brushed, washed, and scented it with oils while protecting it from lice, dirt, and the relentless Mediterranean heat. Combs made from bone or wood helped untangle curls, though ancient grooming was rarely as graceful as Greek sculpture suggests. Somewhere in Athens, at any given moment, a child was absolutely complaining, while someone painfully dragged a comb through tangled hair. For boys especially, long hair carried symbolic importance before adulthood. In several Greek regions, cutting the hair marked an important rite of passage. As boys approached maturity, they dedicated locks of their childhood hair to gods such as Apollo or local deities connected with youth and protection. The ritual represented the end of childhood and the beginning of adult responsibilities. Spartan boys experienced this transition differently from Athenian youths. In Sparta, life centered around military discipline from an early age. Boys entered the Agog training system as children and endured harsh physical conditioning designed to create warriors loyal to the state above all else. Yet even Spartans valued hair deeply. Adult Spartan men famously wore long hair, believing it made handsome men more impressive and frightening men more terrifying in battle. Greek girls also wore long hair throughout childhood, usually styled simply at first. Braids, ribbons, and tied sections helped manage the hair while gradually preparing girls for the more elaborate hairstyles expected in adulthood and marriage. Hair became closely connected with femininity, modesty, and family honor. And throughout Greek society, beauty mattered. The Greeks admired symmetry, balance, and carefully maintained appearances. Children from wealthy households especially reflected their family's status through grooming and clothing. A well-presented child demonstrated household discipline and prosperity. An unkempt appearance suggested neglect or poverty. Yet childhood curls also carried emotional meaning. When tragedy struck, hair often became part of mourning rituals. Families cut locks from children who died young and dedicated them during funerals or burials. In some graves, archaeologists have even discovered preserved strands of hair placed carefully beside the dead. To the Greeks, hair was not separate from life itself. It grew as the child grew. It marked transitions, sacrifices, and identity. And eventually, those soft childhood curls would disappear, replaced by the more serious appearances demanded by adulthood in the ancient Greek world. For Greek men, hair was not merely decoration. It was identity, masculinity, discipline, and pride worn openly for the world to judge. Across ancient Greece, hairstyles for men shifted depending on region, fashion, age, and profession. But one truth remained constant: appearance mattered deeply. A man's hair and beard reflected not only personal taste, but his status as a citizen, warrior, philosopher, or labourer. Greeks believed the body itself revealed character, and naturally they spent considerable time making sure their character looked appropriately heroic. Beards held particular importance. By adulthood, most Greek men wore full beards as symbols of maturity and dignity. A thick beard suggested wisdom, self-control, and masculine authority. Philosophers especially embraced the image enthusiastically. Men like Socrates became associated with rugged beards and thoughtful appearances, helping establish the timeless tradition of intelligent men looking slightly disorganized while discussing the meaning of existence. Young men, however, usually appeared clean-faced before reaching maturity. The transition into beard growth symbolized adulthood, much like the cutting of childhood hair earlier in life. Once facial hair appeared fully, it became a visible sign that a boy had entered the adult male world of politics, warfare, and civic responsibility. Warriors treated hair with almost sacred seriousness. The Spartans famously wore their hair long before battle, combing and arranging it carefully prior to combat. According to Greek writers, Spartan soldiers believed beautiful hair enhanced dignity and made brave men appear even more noble. Imagine preparing for a deadly battle against spear-wielding enemies while simultaneously making sure your hair looked magnificent. Priorities remain surprisingly consistent across human history. Other Greeks occasionally mocked Spartan vanity, but long hair among warriors carried symbolic weight beyond appearance. It represented freedom, courage, and elite status. Slaves and criminals were often forced to wear cropped hair or had their heads shaved publicly as punishment. Hair therefore became closely tied to personal honor. Athenians generally preferred more controlled styles. Men kept their hair shorter and neatly maintained, especially during later periods influenced by changing fashion and military practicality. After the rise of Alexander the Great, shorter hairstyles and shaved faces became more fashionable because Alexander reportedly disliked beards in battle, fearing enemies could grab them during combat, which is honestly one of the more practical grooming arguments in ancient history. Barbershops also became important social spaces throughout Greek cities. Men gathered there not only for trimming and grooming, but for conversation, gossip, politics, and debate. A Greek barber likely knew more about city scandals than half the politicians discussing them publicly in the agora. Hair oils and perfumes remained common among wealthy men as well. Olive oil protected hair beneath the sun, while scented oils signaled refinement and status. Excessive vanity, however, could attract criticism. Greek society admired beauty, but also feared softness and decadence. So Greek men constantly balanced elegance with toughness. A warrior needed to appear disciplined but not dull, handsome but not weak, groomed but not overly luxurious, and ideally, heroic enough to look impressive later when carved into marble statues for future generations. For women in ancient Greece, Hair was one of the most important markers of beauty, respectability, and social identity. A woman's hairstyle could reveal her age, marital status, wealth, and even her moral reputation before she spoke a single word. Greek society placed enormous attention on feminine appearance, particularly among the upper classes, where elegance became almost a form of social duty, and maintaining that elegance required time, patience, oils, ribbons, pins, mirrors, servants, and occasionally the emotional endurance of a military campaign. Most Greek women wore their hair long. Loose hair, however, was usually associated with youth, religious ritual, or moments of grief. Respectable adult women commonly styled their hair into controlled arrangements, braided crowns, coiled buns, knotted styles at the back of the head, or carefully pinned curls framing the face. The Greeks admired harmony and balance in feminine beauty. Hairstyles were meant to appear graceful and refined rather than wild or excessive, at least in theory. In practice, some wealthy women constructed elaborate arrangements that likely required engineering skills rivaling small temples. Hairpins made from bronze, ivory or bone helped secure complex styles. Cloth bands called taeniae wrapped around the hair, while nets and veils sometimes covered it partially in public. Wealthier women decorated hairstyles with gold ornaments, ribbons, pearls and perfumes, imported through Mediterranean trade routes. Servants played a major role in this daily routine. Female attendants washed, brushed, curled, braided, and scented their mistress's hair each morning. Olive oil remained essential for keeping hair soft beneath the dry Greek climate. Perfumed oils blended with herbs and flowers added fragrance, turning grooming into both cosmetic care and social ritual. Greek literature occasionally reveals how seriously women valued their hair. Comedies mocked vanity and expensive grooming habits. Philosophers warned against excessive luxury. Meanwhile, aristocratic women quietly continued spending large portions of the morning arranging curls with complete determination. Civilization survives through consistency. Blonde hair became especially admired in parts of Greece because it appeared exotic and rare. Some women lightened their hair using herbal mixtures or exposure to sunlight, though ancient cosmetic experiments were not always kind to the scalp. Fashion has historically involved people making questionable decisions in pursuit of beauty. Public appearance mattered enormously because women reflected family honor. A well-groomed wife demonstrated discipline, wealth, and proper household management. Disheveled hair suggested emotional disorder, mourning, poverty, or social disgrace. During religious festivals, weddings, and public ceremonies, hairstyles became even more elaborate, transforming women into living symbols of family prestige. Greek goddesses reflected these ideals in art and mythology. Aphrodite appeared with flowing curls symbolizing beauty and desire, while Artemis often wore more restrained styles, reflecting independence and discipline. Hair, therefore, was never simply decorative. It carried social meaning everywhere. Each braid, ribbon, and curl quietly announced a woman's place within the carefully ordered world of ancient Greece, a society obsessed with beauty, symbolism, and the endless effort of appearing effortlessly graceful. In ancient Greece, marriage marked one of the most important transitions in a woman's life, and hair stood at the very center of the ceremony. A bride's hairstyle was not chosen casually. Every braid, ribbon, curl, and veil carried symbolic meaning connected to purity, fertility, adulthood, and the movement from one household into another. Greek weddings were deeply religious occasions, and hair became part of the sacred transformation itself. Before the wedding, many brides participated in ritual preparations involving bathing, offerings, and grooming ceremonies, supervised by female relatives and attendants. Hair was carefully washed with scented oils and arranged over many patient hours. Somewhere in Athens, a nervous bride was absolutely sitting motionless, while three women argued over the correct placement of ribbons. Long hair symbolized femininity and fertility, qualities highly valued in Greek marriage traditions. Brides often wore their hair elaborately braided or gathered into elegant knots, secured with decorative pins, golden bands, or veils. White ribbons frequently appeared in the hairstyle, representing purity and transition into married life. Veils played an especially important role. During portions of the wedding ceremony, the bride's hair remained partially hidden beneath fine cloth coverings. The unveiling itself carried symbolic weight, representing her passage from maidenhood into the world of adulthood and family responsibility. Greek society treated marriage not primarily as romance, but as an alliance between households designed to preserve property, lineage, and social order. Love was appreciated, certainly, but stable inheritance tended to receive significantly more planning. Hair also connected directly with religion during marriage rituals. Brides commonly dedicated locks of hair to deities before the ceremony, especially to goddesses associated with marriage and protection, such as Hera or Artemis. These offerings symbolized the leaving behind of childhood and the acceptance of adult responsibilities. Men underwent simpler transformations by comparison, because ancient societies consistently expected women to carry approximately 90% of ceremonial symbolism, while men mostly tried not to spill wine during public rituals. Wedding processions moved through the streets accompanied by torches, songs, and celebration. The bride's carefully arranged hair became part of the public spectacle, demonstrating the honor and wealth of both families involved. Guests observed every detail closely. Beautiful grooming reflected successful household preparation and respectable social standing. After marriage, hairstyles often changed subtly to reflect a woman's new role as wife and future mother. Married women generally wore more controlled and mature styles compared to unmarried girls, whose loose curls still symbolized youth. Hair also remained tied to fertility and motherhood after the wedding itself. During religious festivals connected with childbirth and family life, women continued using hair rituals and offerings as acts of devotion to the gods. To the Greeks, marriage transformed not only social identity, but physical presentation as well. A new hairstyle marked a new life, and beneath the ribbons, oils, and carefully pinned curls stood the quiet reality at the center of Greek society itself. Marriage was not simply personal. It was sacred, political, and deeply symbolic all at once. In ancient Greece, hair did more than reflect beauty or personal style. It also revealed power. A single glance at someone's grooming could often expose their social position immediately: citizen or slave, noblewoman or servant, wealthy youth or exhausted laborer. Greek society relied heavily on visible symbols of status, and hair became one of the clearest markers dividing freedom from servitude. For free citizens, especially among the upper classes, carefully maintained hair reflected dignity and self-control. Grooming required time, oils, mirrors, servants, and leisure, luxuries not equally available to everyone. A polished appearance quietly announced that a person possessed enough wealth and stability to focus on elegance rather than mere survival. Slaves, however, occupied a very different world. Many enslaved people wore their hair short for practical reasons connected to labor and control. Agricultural workers, household servants, miners, and rowers could not realistically maintain elaborate hairstyles while enduring exhausting physical work. Cropped hair also visually separated slaves from elite citizens whose carefully styled curls symbolized freedom and refinement. In some cases, shaving the head carried deliberate humiliation. Greek societies occasionally cut or shaved hair as punishment for criminals, captives, or disgraced individuals. Since hair represented dignity and identity, removing it publicly became a way to strip away social honor. Across history, humans have displayed a remarkable talent for turning hairstyles into instruments of psychological warfare. Household slaves, especially female attendants serving wealthy women, sometimes maintained more carefully groomed appearances because their work involved assisting directly with cosmetics, bathing, and hairdressing. Some became highly skilled in arranging curls, braids, perfumes, and decorative styles for aristocratic households. Ironically, the women creating elegant hairstyles often possessed far less freedom than the women wearing them. Foreign slaves could sometimes be identified by distinct hairstyles or grooming traditions from their homelands. Greece's trade networks brought enslaved people from Thrace, Anatolia, Egypt, and other regions across the Mediterranean world. Differences in hair texture, grooming customs, and dress occasionally marked outsiders immediately within Greek society. For men, appearance also reflected citizenship and military identity. A free Greek man ideally appeared disciplined, athletic, and well-groomed without seeming overly luxurious. Excessive vanity attracted suspicion because Greek culture valued moderation, at least publicly. Privately, Many aristocrats remained extremely invested in looking impressive, while pretending not to care very much. Philosophers frequently criticized extravagant grooming as signs of moral weakness or decadence. Yet even those criticizing vanity usually maintained recognizable appearances themselves. Ancient intellectuals have always enjoyed condemning society while carefully cultivating their own iconic image. Hair therefore became deeply political. It reflected not only personal taste, but access to freedom, wealth, and respect within society. A citizen might choose his hairstyle, a slave often could not. A wealthy woman could spend hours arranging symbolic curls, while the servant beside her remained invisible, despite performing the labour. And throughout Greece, these differences remained immediately visible. One society, one marketplace, one temple courtyard. Yet entire worlds of inequality revealed quietly through something as ordinary and as meaningful as hair. Maintaining beautiful hair in ancient Greece required far more than a comb and good intentions. The Mediterranean climate brought heat, dust, sea air, and constant sunlight, all of which could leave hair dry, tangled, or damaged. Greeks therefore developed elaborate daily grooming routines involving oils, perfumes, combs, mirrors, and cosmetics designed to preserve softness and elegance. Hair care became part hygiene, part ritual, and part carefully managed social performance. Olive oil stood at the center of nearly everything. The Greeks used olive oil constantly for cooking, athletics, religion, skincare, and hair treatment. Men and women rubbed scented oils into their hair to protect it from dryness, while adding shine and fragrance. Wealthier households infused oils with herbs, flowers, and imported perfumes such as myrrh or saffron, creating scents associated with refinement and status. A noblewoman entering a gathering might announce her presence long before speaking, simply because expensive perfume drifted through the room first. Greek grooming tools were surprisingly sophisticated. Bone and wooden combs untangled curls, while bronze mirrors reflected carefully arranged hairstyles back at their owners. Hairpins, ribbons, nets, and decorative bands allowed complex styles to hold throughout the day, despite heat and movement. Female servants often handled much of this work inside wealthy households. Hair could be curled using heated metal rods or arranged into layered braids requiring patience and precision. A single elaborate hairstyle might consume hours. Somewhere in ancient Athens, an exhausted servant absolutely stared at a half-finished braid and questioned every life decision leading to that moment. Men also participated heavily in grooming culture. Beards were trimmed carefully. Hair was washed, combed, and oiled regularly. Athletes cleaned themselves after exercise using oils and scraping tools called strigils, removing sweat and dirt from both body and hair. Greek society admired physical beauty deeply, especially among young men, and appearance became tied closely to ideals of health, discipline, and self-control. Public spaces reflected this obsession with grooming. Barbershops became common social centers where men gathered not only for haircuts, but also for gossip, debate, and political discussion. Philosophers, merchants, and citizens exchanged news while barbers worked through crowded rooms filled with conversation and flying curls of hair. Ancient Greece effectively turned haircuts into community events. At the same time, moral debates surrounded luxury and cosmetics. Some philosophers warned that excessive perfumes and elaborate grooming weakened character. Simplicity, moderation, and self-discipline were praised as ideal virtues. Yet Greek elites continued importing expensive oils and decorating themselves enthusiastically anyway. Human beings have always enjoyed criticizing vanity while secretly purchasing scented products. Religious practices also connected closely with hair care. Participants in festivals washed and groomed themselves before entering sacred spaces. Priests and priestesses maintained specific appearances tied to ritual purity. Clean, carefully arranged hair reflected order, discipline, and respect toward the gods. To the Greeks, grooming was never entirely superficial. Beautiful hair reflected inner balance, social identity, and civilized behavior itself. Because in a culture obsessed with harmony and appearance, even the smallest curl carried meaning. In ancient Greece, hair was not only connected to beauty and celebration, it also belonged to grief. When death entered a household, The carefully arranged curls and braided elegance of daily life often disappeared immediately. Hair became part of mourning rituals so emotional and symbolic that even a single cut lock could carry enormous meaning. To the Greeks, grief was not meant to remain hidden quietly inside the heart. It was meant to be seen, and hair made sorrow visible. During funerals, mourners commonly cut or tore their hair as a public sign of suffering. Women especially loosened their carefully styled hair, letting it fall wildly around the shoulders while crying beside the dead. In Greek art and literature, scenes of mourning often show women clutching their hair, tearing at braids, or cutting long locks during funeral rites. The contrast mattered deeply. Orderly hair symbolized civilization, balance, and social stability. Disordered hair reflected emotional collapse. When grief shattered the normal structure of life, appearance shattered alongside it. Men participated as well, though often less dramatically. Some cut portions of their hair short during mourning periods, offering the locks to the deceased as acts of devotion and remembrance. Hair became a final gift, something deeply personal surrendered in honor of the dead. One of the most famous examples appears in Homer's Iliad. After the death of Patroclus, Achilles cuts his long hair beside the funeral pyre. The moment carries enormous emotional weight, because Achilles had spent years growing that hair as a sacred offering intended for a river god upon returning home safely. Instead, grief transforms the offering completely. His hair no longer belongs to the future, it belongs to the dead. Greek mourning rituals could become intensely physical. Families gathered around the body, singing laments while tearing clothing, scratching faces and crying openly. Professional mourners were sometimes hired to amplify public displays of grief. Ancient funerals occasionally resembled emotionally devastating theatrical performances, where everyone participated fully, and subtle restraint was considered almost suspicious. Hair also appeared in sacrificial rituals beyond funerals. Before major life transitions or dangerous journeys, Greeks sometimes dedicated locks of hair to the gods. Young people offered childhood curls before entering adulthood. Sailors cut hair before voyages seeking divine protection. Warriors made offerings before battle. Hair symbolized a part of the self permanently surrendered in exchange for favor, protection, or remembrance. Because hair continued growing throughout life, Greeks viewed it as deeply connected to personal identity and vitality. Cutting it therefore carried emotional and spiritual power. Even slaves and captives experienced this symbolism differently. Forced shaving could represent humiliation and loss of identity, while voluntary cutting during mourning reflected love and devotion. The action itself remained the same. The meaning changed entirely depending on circumstance. To the Greeks, hair was never just decoration resting upon the body. It carried memory. It carried sacrifice. And during moments of death and grief, it became one of the most visible ways human beings expressed the unbearable weight of loss. Long after the city-states of ancient Greece faded into history, their ideas about beauty, grooming, and hair continued shaping the world. The Greeks believed the human body should reflect harmony, balance, and proportion. Hair became part of that philosophy, whether arranged in careful curls, braided beneath ribbons, or flowing beneath a warrior's helmet. Greek hairstyles aimed to appear graceful without seeming chaotic. The ideal was beauty controlled by discipline, at least ideally. Human vanity naturally remained slightly less philosophical in practice. Greek sculptors preserved these standards in marble across centuries. Statues of athletes displayed carefully carved curls resting against smooth foreheads. Goddesses appeared with elegant waves cascading over their shoulders. Philosophers wore thoughtful beards that somehow communicated both wisdom and the possibility they had not slept properly in days.